Hello and welcome to the Podawakens. My name is Jordan, and we are continuing our High Republic Road to the Acolyte Phase 1 here series on the podcast. My name is Jordan, as I stated, and with me today talking The Rising Storm is Jamie. How are you, Jamie?
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to talk any and all things High Republic. As you mentioned, my name is Jamie. I am one of the hosts of Daughters of the Galaxy over on the Virtual Cantina network. And we air every other Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, here on Batu East time. And we talk all things women in Star Wars, which has been a lot of fun. But we haven't really dipped our toes into the High Republic yet. I feel like we got to get on that with the Acolyte coming right up.
Yeah, really. I mean, it is approaching so much faster. Kind of the downside, I think, of some of the I don't know post-COVID times, in the sense of like they really truncate the marketing, I would say, right? Like
Yeah,
we didn't get a trailer or a release date until last week, from
right.
when we're recording this. And then it's like I'd had this idea in my head, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what time I had. I was kind of going off of the rumored date of June 5th in my
Right,
head. I was
right.
like, all right, let's try to start ramping up here. But yeah, that's kind of the downside is then it's like a mad dash now to try to get done all of these books before Acolyte launches.
And it's a lot. I mean, it's
We're just
definitely
doing.
not like a one or two book.
I'm only gonna do phase one before Acolyte. I think I've
That's fair.
determined that. I think I've
That's fair.
determined.
Although there are some fun rumors swirling from, the trailer that we saw in some phase 2 stuff. So I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a lot. It's definitely a lot to cover.
But then I'll cover, phase two and three after the fact, I guess. But I'm trying not to stress myself out too
That's
much.
fair. That's fair. That's reasonable. It's definitely coming quick, and I know I'm really excited and so many other people are really excited, and for so many of us High Republic fans, really outside of like Young Jedi Adventures, this is our first time seeing
Mhm.
this timeline in visual media that isn't, comic books, of course. So I can't wait. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I've said this a few times on here, so people that are listening to all of these are going to be very annoyed and probably bored of me saying this. But it's a different guest each time, so I feel like I have to explain this. But um, when I first launched the show in 2019, it was with my friend Logan, and we were. I just recently like re-put some of those episodes on the YouTube. Like they were on the
Mhm.
audio version, but then I put like a static image and put them on YouTube. And my mic was awful back then too. Like I had to. There was something wrong with my cord, so they don't sound great. But if people are interested, those are the first 5 episodes are up there. That we kind of talked about like what we wanted in the future of Star Wars. This was after Rise of Skywalker, and I had said
Mhm.
I wanted like a whole new era, something that is like, yeah, you can have like Yoda or whatever, but I was like, you can even go like 900 years in the past, so you don't have the same characters. But
Mhm.
I really want to dive into something like different, either like far in the future, far in the past. Just let's leave some of the well, like pumped areas that we've, like
Yeah,
some of the
totally agree.
areas have been so like drilled so far down if they're like looking for oil almost, right? Like we have got
It's true.
between 3 and 4 is like, yeah, there's so much stuff
We
in
get
there,
it.
right? Yeah. And especially after Disney first took over, that was like where they focused on because they wanted to get the original trilogy aesthetic, and they
Mhm.
were trying to shy away from the prequels and stuff. And then once they realized the prequels were popular, they started doing more stuff again in that like 1 to 3 range, but like never really had explored prior to episode 1.
Mhm.
And like that time frame is one of my favorite of the eras. Is like when I was growing up, the book that series that I read a lot was the Jedi Apprentice series by Jude
Okay.
Watson.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
was like 18 of those books.
Yeah, it's
Now
a
they're
lot of
very
books.
thin, very thin, but like I would read them in a day or whatever. And it was Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan before episode 1, and just
Mhm.
seeing like Jedi doing what they do before the Sith reveal themselves was something I thought
Mhm.
was very interesting. Like, what do they do as peacekeepers? We don't really get to
Yeah.
see it that often before they become warriors. And it was probably like a month or not soon after that that the High Republic got announced, or like the rumors started swirling of it, and then they did the full unveiling, and I was like, this is what I wanted, just something fresh slate, get me into that. And I started reading it like as it came out, Light of the
Mhm.
Jedi. It took me a bit to get into
Mhm.
um Light of the Jedi did. Uh Rising Storm, the one we're going to talk about today, is the one that really like sold me on the High Republic. And I was like, all right, let's it's not my favorite. I think Fallen Star is now my favorite, but like
Oh god.
this one this one I was like, okay, this is picking up. And
Yeah.
I kind of like too, like a lot of those books that they were releasing originally during the Disney era when after they bought them was,
Mhm.
here's a book with Luke, here's a book with Leia, here's a book with these characters, but they never had like a through line. It'd be like, this
Yeah.
one's from before New Hope, this one's after Empire.
Like little puzzle pieces kind of just
Yeah,
dropping into the timeline. Yeah, for sure. I
and what I
agree.
like about this is like getting a full um, storyline that almost felt like watching a TV show where you're like,
Yes.
okay, now I'm checking in with these characters again. I like these characters.
Mhm.
Where are they going with this? And that was something that really sold me on the idea of it. And really book two, because I read all the adults first. So
Mhm.
I was really out of order. But reading the adult books first, I was like, okay, yes, let's check in with Stellan again. Let's check in with Elzar, right? Like that
Mhm.
type of stuff I really, really enjoyed with these characters.
Yeah, and I think one of the real testaments of how this story is put together is that when you look at the Project Luminous team and all the writers and the people contributing to this world and this timeline, is that you do actually have a fair amount of writers who have worked on visual media, who've worked on movies and television and worked on radio dramas. And they're not, they're incredible authors by their own standing and with their own talents, of course, but they have that experience of sort of the callback, like you were talking about, where they can almost write in like an episodic manner, like we would see on a TV show. So it does keep the story moving in a really interesting way. It keeps the pace moving in a really interesting way, and you don't find that you're waiting too long before you can see your favorite characters again. Which, for the number of books and comics that this story entails, um, is great.
Yeah.
Until they all
Yeah.
die, and then in which case you're all, you're up a creek.
Right, exactly. Um okay, so before we dive into the book though, I have a
Mm,
list of questions I like to ask each of my guests
yeah,
for their first visit. So, it's just a general list of your favorite Star Wars media. Um
absolutely.
Favorite Star Wars movie.
Ugh. So I always like to joke about that which era, because it's
Right.
really hard. It's like picking a favorite child. So if we're talking about the original trilogy, I'm an Empire girly. I love The Empire Strikes Back.
Same.
Good. See, we're on a good place now.
Yes.
I love. Listen, I know this is a really spicy take, although I feel like we're in a timeline where they're finally starting to be more appreciated. I love the prequel trilogy. I have a lot of
Right,
just really
same.
happy memories of seeing the prequel trilogy in the theaters with my dad. And, I think in the moment, because I was younger, I was like, oh, this is so political and it's dragging out. But growing to appreciate it as an adult, I really love Attack of the Clones.
Oh,
I,
interesting.
yeah, I know that's a sort of hot take, but I
Yeah, that's
really
my
like
least
Attack of the
favorite.
Clones. Yeah,
That's my least
and I
favorite.
get it.
But
I've grown up with
Phantom
that.
Phantom is my favorite of the prequels. I think that's a hot take too. A lot of people go with Revenge, but
Yes.
yeah,
I love I just think there's something so wonderful about the aesthetics of the Phantom Menace.
yeah,
Just like that very like early, we're definitely playing with a lot of different types of special effects, and we're doing that
yeah,
weird mix of like green screen but still some model work, and like it's just such a iconic Star Wars mishmash of effect in a movie. I don't know. I also really enjoy the Phantom Menace, so I can't say
yeah.
anything. And of the Disney era, listen, if somebody says, "Do you want to watch Rogue One?" I will grab my box of tissues and I will watch it every single time. I just love Rogue One. I think it's a masterpiece of a film.
Yeah, I like
I
Rogue
don't care
One
for the
as well.
sequel trilogies, so that I don't have a
Oh,
favorite in that,
okay.
because honestly, I'm not a sequel trilogy person. Um, all three movies just felt really disconnected to me. There are
Yeah, they
glimmers
do.
in each movie that I really enjoy, but as an overall, trilogy, it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah, I like the sequels. I big fan of them, but I am not blind to the fact that there was no plan, and it
Yeah.
feels like there's no
It
plan.
feels like
Like,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a no
Um,
hate thing. I have lots of friends that love it. Just not my thing.
so this answer might be something you already kind of said though, but favorite trilogy. I know which one it's not now. What is your favorite trilogy?
It depends on the day. I think the original trilogy are three of my comfort movies. So, especially with a lot of the uncertainty we've been through in the last couple of years with the pandemic and
Yeah,
just living in this very high stress universe, the original trilogy is absolutely like a comfort trilogy for me, and I could watch those three movies and just feel the stress kind of leaving my body. Um the prequel trilogy I definitely enjoy a lot, but I just don't think there's anything quite like the originals for me. I love
yeah.
them. I just love them. A lot of happy memories watching them with my dad and with my brother, and my mom kind of being like, "Yeah, I recognize C-3PO," and trying her best to get involved, but my mom was never really much of a Star
It's
Wars
funny.
lady. It was all from my dad.
Mine was opposite.
Oh yeah?
My mom was the big Star Wars fan. My dad didn't start watching them until Force Awakens.
Oh wow.
Like
All right.
2015, in the build up to that, he watched all of them.
I love
He would
that.
always just kind of stayed away from it, but he kind
Yeah.
of did to like bond with my nephews, and then yeah, so then he was watching them, and he got into like watching Rebels and Clone Wars and all that. So
Ugh, the best. Love
he
it.
was a late bloomer
Hey,
when it comes to
but
Star Wars.
what a time to jump in. I mean, he was jumping into an era where there was so much content to be able to enjoy. So I think
Yeah,
that's great.
favorite character.
Oh, again, this is like one of like picking my favorite child situation. Um, so this is such a hard question. My favorite character in the entire saga is Hera Syndulla. Um, she is absolutely a comfort character for me, especially now that I have my own daughter. Rebels just really hit at a very important and significant time in my life, and I just really connected with Hera as a character. I think she's incredible, strong, fierce leader, but also has that um, very nurturing side to kind of balance out the cutthroat military lead. Having said that, Mr. Elzar Mann is giving her a run for the money right now. I love Elzar. He's an absolute disaster of a man, and I love a messy character, and he is a very messy character.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot of Elzar
Yes, we
tonight.
will. He's a mess.
Favorite TV show. This could be, you could give me animated, live action. You can give me both, like your favorite
Yeah.
animated, favorite live action,
Yeah,
whatever.
I have one of each. My favorite animated show, and really up until The High Republic came out, my all-time favorite little snippet of Star Wars was Star Wars Rebels, which I know a lot of
Nice.
people didn't enjoy until this Ahsoka show came out, and
Hmm.
people were kind of doubling back on it to catch up with those characters. But I love Rebels because it just introduces so much weird, sort of unexplored areas of the Force, and with the Jedi temples and the world between worlds, and the very atypical type of Jedi. I'm also a sucker for a found family. So, like, Rebels is all of those things. Um, and then when I really want to be stressed out, I love Andor. I think Andor is my all time favorite. Well, I mean, we'll see if that's still true after June. But it's my favorite live action Star Wars show. Loved it. Just so good. Such tense storytelling and
Yeah.
incredible performances. Great story. I love it.
Pre-ordered it. I got the Blu-ray. It's
Yeah.
coming whenever it does. I'm excited.
Yeah. It's,
Um,
it's, it's a good one.
Rebels is my favorite animated as well.
Good choice.
Uh, just something about like, I know a lot of people always say Clone Wars, but for me,
Yeah.
at times Clone Wars jumps around too much.
I agree.
Of like,
Mhm.
I like Rebels being able to focus on those core members, and we get all the
Yep.
character development with them, and we stay with them. It's not like, here's the R2 Jar Jar episode, and you're like,
Yeah.
I like those characters, but like, when are we gonna see something else?
Yeah, and some of those arcs just felt really long. Like, there are some arcs I really love, but there are some
Yeah.
arcs in the Clone Wars that I'm like, "Oh, this is still going. It is just not for me." I do
What I was
love the
thinking
Clone
about
Wars,
is
but I
like,
think it's like you, it's
just like
bits and pieces.
R2 with like all these other droids and like this little tiny guy, I forget his name, but like that arc takes forever. It's like season 5 or something. I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, it just keeps going. Like,
Yeah.
how many episodes is this thing? You're checking on Disney Plus to see when the arc changes over.
Yeah, you're like, oh my god, it's a 4 episode arc for
It
these?
just keeps going. Yeah, I get it.
Do you play any of the games?
So a fun fact about me is that I have a lot of issues with depth perception.
Okay.
So video games can get really tricky for me, especially as they've gotten more immersive.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I live literally Galaxy's Edge is like right behind me. I live right behind Hollywood Studios.
Oh, do you
Uh,
really?
yeah, so
I
I
used to
actually.
live there. I used to work there.
Oh, shut up, dude. Me too.
Really?
Hey.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I was a Hollywood Studios cast member for a little while. Jumped around. Now I stay home with my daughter, hoping to get back to Disney. This is a long story for another time, but we when the Void was open, I don't know if you were down here when the Void was open down at Disney Springs. That like
No,
super
I wasn't when they were
immersive.
there, no.
Listen, they could have filmed me and used it for like marketing reel because I was like holding onto walls, like laying on the floor crying because I was so overwhelmed and like depth perception was so messed up. Having said that, because I'm such a huge fan of Hera, I forced myself to play just a little bit of Squadrons. It did
Oh,
not
okay.
go well. um, Usually, what I'll do is I'll just go onto YouTube and thank whichever blessed human being has updated all the cutscenes and let me
Oh,
watch the
right.
cutscenes from from Jedi Survivor and
So do you
Squadrons
have one
and
of those that you liked
Storm.
watching more?
I think the Squadron story is just so light. Like, there's not really much story because it's not really designed to be much story.
Yeah.
It's it's the same battle that we kind of always get with the New Republic and the Empire, and the dregs of the Empire. I think there's a lot of really beautiful story with Cal Kestis. So
Hmm.
I think those games are really great. I wish I was a little more familiar with them, but the cutscenes that I've watched, I've really enjoyed.
Yeah. No, I like those games a lot. My nostalgia would say Knights of the Old Republic. I'm a
Yeah.
big Knights of the Old Republic, and of
Yep.
course the original
My best friend too.
Battlefronts and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
like, um, playing Jedi Survivor at the beginning of last year was
Hmm.
such a highlight for me. It's one of my favorite Star Wars things I've done, and then it's like it tied in the High Republic, and when I saw that, I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh my
Yeah.
god,
Yeah.
this is great!"
Dude, my phone blew up when people were like, "Hey, are you playing Jedi Survivor?" And I'm like, "No, why?" And they're like, "High Republic." And I was like on YouTube like a crazy person searching for the little snippets here and there, and it definitely
Yeah,
it's a nice little warm fuzzy.
yeah, it was really great.
Hmm.
Okay, did you read any of the old expanded universe, and if so, do you have a favorite book of that?
Yeah, so yes to both questions. Um it was funny. It's like, when things go off the market or they take things away, suddenly there's like this huge demand for them and everybody wants to know what's going on. So,
Yeah.
right around the time that Disney acquired Star Wars, I was like, well, I better jump on these books while I can. And I started them and hated it. And I think I just started at a bad point. Like, I just started at a point in the story where the books were kind of hard to read and they were slow and
Mm.
just not interesting. Having said that, I made it my goal this year to actually read, and this is stupid and I'm regretting my choice immensely, but my goal this year is to read the entire expanded universe.
Oh,
Um,
dang.
yeah, we're at the end of March and I'm 22 books into it already.
Dang. That's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
good.
So I can usually knock out a book in, 2 or 3 days, but obviously with the new High Republic books coming out, I kind of have to
Yeah.
pepper in, prioritizing what's more important for me. So I really, when I finally got around to it, I really enjoyed Heir to the Empire, the trilogy. But honestly, my favorite books are the X-Wing books. I love the X-Wing
Oh,
books.
okay.
And I really enjoyed, some of the characters that really only live in those X-Wing books, like the Corran Horn, um,
Mm.
the X-Wing pilot Corran Horn. So I went back and read I, Jedi and really enjoyed that too, which I know is kind of a
Interesting.
hot take because a lot of people didn't like that book.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very much like the High Republic books. There's just a lot going on in it, and it kind of
Hmm.
bounces around a little bit. Um, one of the sticky things about the EU is that you have so many writers contributing to it, and by and
Yeah.
large, they're all kind of left unchecked. So you can
Yep.
get anything out of those stories, including a lot of things that just don't make sense.
And that's why
um,
George would just overwrite whatever he didn't care for.
yep,
He was like,
exactly,
nope.
exactly. The other really tricky thing, and I think ultimately what bit me in the butt when I started reading it, back in like 2014, 2015, is that every writer kind of has their own take on these characters, so you
Yeah.
have to kind of settle into the writer that you really enjoy. So like, I know everybody loves him and for good reason, but like Timothy Zahn is just such a great character writer. um and I've found that like I tend to gravitate towards his interpretation of like Luke over somebody else's interpretation of Luke. And then obviously he created Thrawn and Mara Jade, so you get,
Right.
you're getting those characters right from the brain that, concocted them. So big fan of that.
Yeah. I read some like when I was a kid.
Mm,
I remember reading some of like the new Jedi Order, like Yu Zhang
yeah,
Bong stuff.
it's tricky.
When they killed Chewie, I threw the book down and I was
Yeah.
done.
But it's so
Um,
funny. So for the book that they killed Chewie, and you can go back a couple books and he gets married and has a kid. So I
yeah, it's
mean,
weird. Like
you
like you
know,
said, inconsistent.
it's just very strange.
Um, but like really, I know this will sound childish. It's the Jedi Apprentice books for me. Like those were just like such a high thing for me of like reading that, and then they did Jedi Quest with Obi-Wan and Anakin, and then they did
Yeah.
The Last of the Jedi, which focused on a character from those books called Ferris, and he was like a
Oh
Jedi
yeah.
undercover, and like
Yeah.
one of the ones survived Order 66 and
Well, and isn't
all
it
that
weird
kind of
that you see that kind of come back in canon? You start to see some of those little threads from Legends
yeah.
and, come back in different ways in canon. Um, that's been, I think, what's so interesting to me is seeing what we had in those stories and seeing them kind of get folded in. Having said that, I wish that if we were using these stories, like I know right now everybody is very tied up with Heir to the Empire with Ahsoka, and I feel like if we're going to use those stories, I wish we hadn't thrown them to Legends. I kind of wish we had just used the story instead of
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of tap dancing around it.
Um,
They're good fun.
okay, and then favorite High Republic book and character. I feel like we already know those. Is it? It's you said before this phase. It's Rising Storm and Elzar Mann, right?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to stick with those answers, but let me tell you, I feel like you can't have Elzar without Stellan and Avar. That's, I
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
kind of their whole thing is they travel together. But man, every time I pick up a book, I just find myself being like, God, I love Wreath. God, I love Vernestra. God, I love Cantum
Hmm.
Sai. God, I love Ram Jamaram. Like, you just find yourself falling in love with these characters, and they're so easy to love. I mean, hello, Geode. Like, why aren't we talking about Geode?
Yeah, true. A lot of people's favorite character.
Leox. I mean, the whole like vessel
Leox.
crew is just such an incredible, incredible crew. Um, so you really do fall in love with them, and I feel like the other book that I absolutely have to bring up, because I feel like it's one that just doesn't get its roses, is the beginning of phase 2 with Path of Deceit.
Convergence. Oh, Path of
No, Path
Deceit.
of
Yeah.
Deceit. Yeah, even before Convergence, right? Because that's what starts to give us the Marda Rose story and the story of the Path of the Open Hand, which eventually, as we know, turns into something very different. Which I don't know. What can we spoil in this? I feel like if we're talking about books, we can spoil things, right?
Yeah, I would say like let's try to keep phase one.
We'll
Is
stick to
what I
phase
would
one.
say.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
So is your favorite phase one so far, or do you have a two, or is it two or three?
I think so. Yeah, I think it
Okay.
is. And I think for fans of Jedi lore and Jedi history, I think phase 2 is an incredible contribution to canon, because we see so much on Jeddah and we see so much with the different force users and force wielders. So I think if you're a big fan of that, phase 2 is incredible. For me, I'm so driven by characters, and I just for me, I gelled so much more with the characters in phase 1. Yeah, I'm gonna stick with that. So I'm gonna stick with phase 1 as my favorite phase.
Awesome. All right, yeah. So we can dive into this book here, Rising Storm, which was written by Cavan Scott.
Uh, he's great. He's what I love about Cavan Scott is sort of what I alluded to earlier, is that he's somebody that has so much experience writing not just novels but comics and radio
Yeah,
dramas and
yeah. He
lots of
does a
different
lot of the
experience. Mhm.
heavy lifting, right? Because he writes a lot of the comics. He's
Mhm.
written. He writes uh the Lorna story, which was Tempest Runner, right?
Yep, he wrote Tempest Runner.
Which was the audio drama that you were referring
Mhm.
to there. I think he's writing the audio drama for phase 3 as well. So
Yeah, George Mann did phase 2. I think he's back to phase 3.
yeah, so yeah,
So
he
yeah, he
has
has
he's writing
he's definitely got a lot going on. um,
yeah,
this book, I don't even like this is such a heavy book, and there's so much content in it that, like, even now sitting here to prepare to talk about it, I'm like, God, where do you even start? Like, where do you start?
Yeah,
And
that's the tough part, right?
I mean, I guess you have to start with our disaster man, Elzar Mann.
Yeah, yeah. So, what draws you so much to Elzar?
Okay. It's like such a complicated thing. So I I fell into the High Republic at a sort of a challenging time in my life when a lot of things just weren't going my way, and I felt like I had lost a lot of my own identity. Um, we all sort of dealt with the fallout of the pandemic very differently, and we're all, at least here in the United States, dealing with so much social change and so many
Yeah.
different things on the outside that can start to affect you on the inside. And I really felt lost. So as I was reading Light of the Jedi, and we get introduced to Elzar, and everybody kind of gives Elzar wide berth because he just does things his own way, and he's maybe not necessarily terribly well liked, but he gets results by doing things his own way. I don't know, my brain just really latched onto that, and being the not necessarily the outsider, but that person with a very different perspective, and that person that's maybe sort of lost their footing on who they are, but is slowly starting to find it and really blossom within it. I think is really what drew me to Elzar as a character, and he's a mess. I mean, if this book is any indication, he is all over the freaking map.
Well, yeah, because
um,
in the prologue, he has this vision, right?
mhm,
Which is after the dedication of Starlight Beacon, where he has this vision of Jedi being killed by like this mysterious cloud, and he sees like Avar and Stellan dying in that,
mhm,
and it's like haunting him, and he keeps worrying about that because he does, you know, he's not your typical Jedi in the sense of being able to not have attachments, right? We find out that these three grew up together, really were, uh, I don't know, like attached to the hip almost, right? Like Avar,
mhm.
Stellan, and Elzar. They were kind of your, I don't know, Ash, Misty, Brock. They were everywhere together.
Yeah, that's a good
But
way to
like
put it.
they were going gym to gym, but they were going everywhere and doing stuff, and it's led to having some emotions, right? Like we kind of learn
Mhm.
Elzar kind of has some feelings for Avar, and there's some very interesting things that dynamics that play between the three of these characters. Um, which I started reading with just the adult books, and I felt like at certain times we weren't getting as much Avar as I thought we
Yeah.
would.
Mhm.
She's really in a bunch of the other material.
The
So
comics,
like,
yeah, it's her story.
yeah, which was surprising to me because like she's on the lead Light of the Jedi cover. I was
Mhm.
like, oh, and she was kind of like a very big role in Light of the Jedi, but um, so I always kept thinking, like, at the end of it, when I got to like Fallen Star, I'm like, man, wait, I need more Avar. Then I went and read, some of the other stuff, and I'm like, okay, here she is. I was like, where'd she go? She's here.
Yeah.
But like, these adult books really focus more, I think, on like the Stellan and Elzar point of view of
Yeah.
this kind of relationship between the three of them.
Well, the three adult books are, I mean, the titles kind of tell you in a lot of ways who they focus on. So, Light of the Jedi, Avar Chris was
Right,
referred to
right.
as, the hero of Hetzal and the Light. So that's really her introduction, and that story does revolve around her as a protagonist. And the Rising Storm, the way that Elzar perceives the Force is all about ocean and waves and storms, and the tempest that's sort of within him, which I guess is a poor choice of words and
Yeah, not the Tempest Runner.
not the Tempest Runner, but like the storm at sea. So this book really focuses on him, and then the Fallen Star, of course, focuses so much on Stellan. Um,
Yes,
and him being sort of this
that's my
rising star in
boy.
the Jedi Order, yeah, and that's fair. Listen, Stellan is. Let me tell you, I read The Fallen Star. It was the slowest book I ever read because I was having such an emotional hard time with it. I was so
Mm,
emotionally invested in it that by the time I got to like those last 100 pages, I was physically ill. I was so stressed out. I was making myself
jeez.
physically ill, and then made the mistake of listening to the audio book, which is
Mm,
masterfully done. And I
it
was
is. That's how
driving,
I
and I would just
experienced
find
it.
myself driving like this, and I was so tense and so stressed out just listening to that book that I had to turn it off. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the Rising Storm.
But
all
yeah,
over the map. I'm so sorry.
Stellan and Bell are my favorite of the High Republic so far.
A great character too, and he also features in this.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So Elzar's having all these terrible visions. He's watching his two best friends die over and over, but he can't even approach them because Avar is off saving the world from the Drangir, and Stellan is busy
Yeah.
with the council. That he's kind of just left to his own devices, which, as we find out, is a terrible, terrible thing for Elzar. Terrible thing for Elzar,
Yeah.
man.
He's really going through it, because then he has another like vision of seeing like Avar, Stellan, and then who we think is Indira Stokes, maybe like the
Mm-hmm.
same species as her, um, and kind of getting that, seeing them all die again. Very, that's kind of like how the prologue ends,
Mm-hmm.
as we'll kind of pick up with there, and like chapter 1 kind of goes really into more of a like Markeon Row situation. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I guess let's just kind of follow Elzar's through line through this story. I think that might be the best way to do it, and then
Yeah,
go back and maybe talk about the other characters.
for sure. Um, yeah, so Elzar finds out that he is promoted to the rank of Jedi Master, which he's the
Hmm.
last of the three firebrands to achieve that, which I think also kind of contributes to some of his insecurity, is that
Yes.
he's watched Avar and Elzar really get promoted. Not sorry, Avar and Stellan, excuse me, get promoted really quickly and be successful in all of their missions, and he's kind of sort of the odd man out, and he's doing his own thing, but doing his own thing isn't getting him the results that his two best friends got. So he finds out he's promoted to this rank, and at the same time, he's sent out to Valo,
Hmm.
which is this very prosperous sort of world in the Republic, to be their marshal, their Jedi marshal, which means that he is sort of the face of the Jedi Order out on Valo.
Yeah,
And
because they built a new temple
yeah,
on Vala where he's going to get stationed to.
and it's by all intents and purposes, it's kind of a cushy gig. I mean, there are lots of
Yeah.
other characters are getting sent out to literally like the way outer rim and like these unexplored and um un charted worlds, and he's being sent out to what is essentially like this sort of resort world. I mean,
Right.
it's
Right.
beautiful oceans and big lakes and a prosperous city, and Valo has been chosen by Lena So, the chancellor, to
Hmm.
host the Republic Fair. So, I mean, that's not too bad. That's pretty cushy, pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Um,
Nothing can go wrong in this scenario.
Not a thing. Not a thing could go wrong. Nothing goes wrong. It's the High Republic. Everybody makes it out alive.
Yes. We wish.
um, so when we leave the end of the first adult book, Light of the Jedi, we know that the Nihil, the sort of these
Yes.
pirates and these God, what do we even call them? They're just like these awful villains, just absolute terrorists of villains.
Yeah, I've been asking
Are
this to everybody so far too. What's your like your overall thoughts on the Nihil as like actual villains for the Jedi and the Republic? How do you feel about them? Are you pretty like they're great, they're okay, like, like could be stronger? What's
I
your thought?
so I'm less interested in the Marauders and I'm more interested in their leadership, especially as we get into phase 3, which we don't want to spoil. At really the end of phase 1 and the beginning of phase 3, you start to see that the power players and the sort of format of their their government of evil, what are we going to call it,
Yeah,
is not as
hierarchy.
their hierarchy of evil, right, is not as strong as it could be. And because you have so many self-serving individuals who are really only focused on themselves and what's in it for them and what it's going to do to their reputation, you start to sort of see a lot of things um, not work out the way that they're intended. I think Martian
Mm.
Rowe, as sort of their face and their their eye, their head, um I think is an incredible villain. I think
I
there's
agree. I
a
think
lot there.
I was a little disappointed by the Nile overall. Like when I was
Mhm.
reading, um, especially like Light of the Jedi, and just like because they were really building them up, right? Like in Project
Hmm.
Luminous, when they were announcing this stuff, they were like, these are villains that, what can really challenge the Jedi? And of course, they didn't want to make more Sith. It's just like that's a tired old trope. So it's like, how can we make like a different villain? But really, they are essentially just like pirates that are like,
Yeah.
okay, a little unpredictable. But what like, with Martian, it's very like, he's a very interesting character to me. And just like every time he's like on the page, or when I listen to the audiobook, it's like I'm like transfixed by like
Hmm.
what Markion is doing compared to like some other villains in this. Like,
Yeah.
I'm actually not a big fan of Lorna.
Oh, really?
Yeah, not really.
Oh,
Yeah, like,
wow. Okay.
spoiler alert for when we get the Tempest Runner. I liked the first like half of that, and then when it became like solely focused on Lorna, it lost me a little bit more.
Oh, see,
Um,
I love Lorna D as a villain. I mean, I hate her. I absolutely cringe whenever I
right,
see
right,
her
right.
because she's awful. But like, I love seeing the sort of recipe to make a villain that you get out of the
Hmm.
Tempest Runner. And we kind of get that. Like, I feel like this book especially gives us a little bit of that sort of recipe for a villain with Markion Rowe,
Yeah.
because we start to find out a little sort of glimmer about his past and his people
Past.
and sort
Yeah.
of where he came from. And this is the book where we sort of get his prize. Like, we get the nameless, we get the leveler,
Hmm.
and we see exactly what Martian Rowe is willing to do to get this weapon, um, and how enthusiastic he is to use it. And when we think about the Nihil, and I know, for a group of marauders, like, you might feel like maybe they weren't built up as much, but really, when I think about the Nihil, and especially like the lower levels of the Nihil, for me, they are the distraction that keeps the Jedi sort of busy while Markion is rolling out his bigger weapon, which would be,
Right, right.
the leveler, or the nameless, or whatever we're calling them, because it's got a bunch of different names. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think they're great villains, and I think seeing them in the comics as well, and seeing them in the younger grade books, and then um, of course in the adult books as well. It's pretty gruesome. They're pretty gruesome villains.
Yeah. Yeah, they can it's very unpredictable, right? Like, they have the whole hyperspace tragedy, which takes
Mm,
everybody by total surprise, and they have the paths, which means they can uh really like pop up anywhere almost
mhm.
any time. It's kind of like the big threat for them, I feel like, is that like they don't
Yeah,
really have any like rules that like they're not
totally
going to
erratic.
have. Yeah, they're not gonna have like honor like the Sith. I mean, like the Sith don't at times, but I mean, like, they're not like, they're focused on destruction and just total confusion, surprise, all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff, which is great. But I definitely like the leadership angle of them more than like the I don't know, the strikes, right? Like the lower level people.
And this book will give us a good example too of what happens when their leadership starts to become very self-serving and sort of acting in their own instead of acting as a team, and we see it not go so well for some of them. Womp
Yeah.
womp. Uh, so at this point, the Jedi kind of know that the Nihil are there, and they know that there is
Hmm.
a threat out there. But Lena So, as the Chancellor of the Republic, um, is really focusing on, all right, we just overcame this huge tragedy at Hetzal. We just overcame this huge hyperspace tragedy. Like, we need to do something unifying. We need to have this Republic fair. For me, one of the reasons I love this book so much is I'm actually a huge fan of the World's Fairs, like, all that
Oh,
took
okay.
place, especially like the 1964 World's Fair. I'm a big
Yeah.
Disney history person, so I've spent
Carousel
lots of time
progress.
reading, and
Yeah,
yeah,
all that good stuff.
lots of time reading and exploring and loving the 1964 World's Fair. So when I heard that there was going to be like the essentially like a World's Fair in Star Wars, I was like, oh, this is right up my alley. I love this. And that's kind of what it's designed to be. Like, they even kind of take a dig at It's a Small World, and they have that whole like Spirit of Unity
Yes.
ride that they all kind of rip on because it sings the same song over and over again. I love that.
Hey, some people like Small World.
I do. It's unironically, it is my favorite theme
Yes,
park attraction.
I do like I don't get annoyed by it the way some people do.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. I know. Um, so oh my gosh, like this again, this through line is getting so complicated because there's so many things happening at any given moment in this book. But
Yeah, well, we could just
uh
hit like we could just hit the big points. So they have the fair, right?
right.
And Elzar is um like we said, he's kind of like the one on the planet that is their marshal. And
Yes.
he kind of has this like relationship type thing with the what is it, the mayor of it, right? Like
She's the like the event planner.
the event planner, right?
She's like in charge of the Republic Fair.
Yeah. Yeah. So they
Samara
have like a
Raoun.
little tryst. I don't know.
Oh yeah, they hook
Don't know
up.
how
I
you
mean,
say
just
it.
call it what it is.
Yeah.
They hook up, and it's a sad thing because I think a lot of people are like, "Yep, that's peak Elzar," but Elzar has also just been rebuked by Avar at the end of that first book, who is his really is his true love. I mean, it's his best friend, and it's somebody that he's
Yeah.
identified that he loves. But as Jedi, of course, they're held to this code. So I think him kind of hooking up with Samara is also like a lot of just deep regret for what happened with Avar. But I mean, also the man is just identified as the throughout the entire story. It's just being super thirsty, and he's just antithesis of Jedi in that regard.
Yeah.
um, and that kind of starts to lead to sort of his almost like his not unraveling in this book, but like it just proves to be a huge distraction for him,
Yeah.
and something that kind of keeps him
It
distracted.
weighs on him.
Meanwhile,
Yeah, it
yeah, it
weighs
does.
on
It
his
weighs on him.
mind, and then he, like you said, it also distracts him. So it's a very
And the fact that Stellan is
intriguing thing.
also there, yeah, and Stellan
Yeah.
has also, Stellan arrives on planet to escort Lena So and to be sort of this face of the Jedi and the council and everything. And meanwhile, Stellan is doing the exasperated Obi-Wan, like, seriously, dude, like,
Yes.
why'd you have to do
Maybe
this?
that's
And
maybe that's why I like Stellan so much, because like I'm a
he's
big
very Obi-Wan.
Obi-Wan fan, and
Hmm.
even like Mark Thompson's voice for Stellan is very like
Yes,
Obi-Wan. So
it's
I think
very
that's what
Obi-Wan.
really won me over with him.
It is. They're both like very by the books Jedi. They are very
Yes.
held to the code and, have to deal with wrangling their fair share of chaos, each of them. So um yeah, so meanwhile, as Elzar is kind of coming back from this whole mess of a hookup he has, the Nihil arrive on planet
Hmm.
and say, awfully nice Republic fare you have here. It'd be a real shame if something were to happen to it. And that's sort of where the chaos begins.
Yeah, this is I, I would say it's kind of the only downside I would have with, I guess, the fallen star is I feel like they kind of hit this note almost exactly the same again.
Mm,
Of like, like not so much the fair part, but it just seems like it is almost the same sort of setup of everything's going fine, nobody's gonna hurt us here, and then it's like, oh, they come again and really wreck us when we're when they're on Aaron Irem, like they do with attacking the actual Irem and then attacking the Starlight Beacon and all that kind of stuff. But um, the fair was a very I wish we would have gotten seen more of it, because it does like happen like right away almost,
yeah.
like I want to see more of like the fair itself on, because like they're talking about what, having like all these different animal, like they had like a, didn't they have like a section for like almost
Hmm.
like a
Yeah,
zoo
like a
of
zoo.
like,
Yeah.
here's all these cool animals. I like the idea of that, like a galactic zoo. I think is a
Have
really
you,
interesting thing.
where are you at in phase three? Because I'm not going to say anything that'll spoil it. But
I haven't started phase 3. I'm in phase
okay.
2.
So, what I love so very much about this book is that you're going to get a fresh perspective on the Valo disaster and the
I saw
Republic
there's a
Fair
book called Escape from Valo,
escape
and
from
I was
Valo.
confused on why it was in
Mhm.
phase 3, but okay, so that's playing a part in that. Okay.
yeah, you're gonna get a little bit more of it, and you're gonna get it from a different set of eyes and a fresh set of eyes. And that to me, let me tell you, like when I came, because I read that one as it came out. I literally read it within 24 hours of it being released.
Oh, nice.
Um, it it was it hit so different seeing it from a different set of eyes, because really when we are in the uh Republic Fair in this book, we're seeing it from the perspective of adults, and you're going to see it from the
Yes.
perspective of kids, which can be a little hard at some points. But I think it sort of gives you a fresh look at how this tragedy and how these villains are affecting different people. One of the other beautiful things about this book is that we're not only seeing this conflict happen from the perspective of the Jedi and the perspective of, Chancellor Lena So and the perspective of the Nihil, but I think an unsung hero in this book, both literally and, sort of hypothetically, is Real Dyro, who is
Hmm.
the GoNet reporter. So Real Dyro has been sent out to Valo to sort of cover the Republic Fair as a reporter and to highlight how beautiful and powerful the Jedi are and look at how amazing this fair is and oh, we love our Chancellor. But she's a reporter that's literally caught on the front lines of a war.
Yep.
And her job to kind of get that message out and to show the rest of the Republic, like, this is what's happening, and this is what's literally happening on the front lines, um I think was amazing, especially as, unfortunately we have so much conflict in our world, for
Hmm.
all these years, and seeing a reporter step forward like that, I think was a really smart choice and a really great character to have in that story,
Yeah, because there
for
was
sure.
points where like she had like a camera droid type
Hmm.
thing with her,
And an
right?
implant in her eye.
Yeah, and it's like seeing when the attack happens or beforehand, and they're like having these meetings with the chancellor, having the meetings with the other senators, and like having to like try to get recording of some of this stuff, right? Like
Hmm.
all of that kind of stuff was really interesting. That's why I think like the adult books have been my favorite, just because they kind of get into a little bit more of the side characters, because they'll do like a
Yeah.
random chapter of like here's a character type thing. While like when I was reading A Test of Courage, it's very like on the point of like the core five characters that
Right.
we're focused on. But when you get some of that other stuff that really adds like depth to the world, I think of like, oh, here's
Hmm.
a reporter. Something we don't really think about when we think about Star Wars too much is like, here's a reporter,
It's
like
like a
trying to
normal
do their
person,
job.
yeah.
Yes, yeah.
We're so used to seeing these incredible Jedi who are like these untouchable, like, galactic heroes, right? And then we see
Hmm.
these awful villains with the Nihil, but we don't think about the characters that are on the side. And there are a lot of on the side characters in the High Republic, just across the board.
Yes,
And
a lot of
even I
characters
think,
overall.
yeah, sitting here even talking about this book, I think part of what is so challenging about it is exactly what you said, is that there are so many little things happening at one time. Like, we haven't even talked about Ty Yorick and,
Yeah.
this monster hunting ex Jedi who finds herself on Vala. We haven't talked about you know the oh god, what was the name of that weapon that was supposed to be like a force disruptor? Like, there's so much happening in
Oh,
this
right, right.
book. um it's just it's bonkers, but really the biggest through line here is that once again the Jedi have, overcome this tragedy in the end of Light of the Jedi, and they almost become too complacent, and they say, we survived this one tragedy, we're good, we're golden, we know how to face the Nihil now. And then it happens to them again on a bigger scale, and they don't learn after that second time. And what we see in that
Yeah.
third adult book is that it happens to them a third time, and it happens to them that third time on the biggest, most disruptive, most destructive scale that it could happen on. Um, and instead of, one world being affected, now it's the entire Republic. Um,
Right.
so that complacency just becomes such a huge problem with the Jedi, and saying, like, okay, like, we've overcome this before, we can do it again. The problem just gets worse and worse and worse. So it can be a hard reread. I Have you reread any of the books yet, like a second time?
I have not. No, like so this one I'm trying to recall stuff that I read like uh 8 9 months ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Because like I had been uh reading phase 2, and then I was like, oh, I gotta start doing this. So it's like going, and
Mhm.
then I started reading, like I took my vacation, I went down to Disney World and listened to some like the youth and middle grade novels as I was driving up and down,
Mhm.
because I live in Maryland, so it's like a 14-hour
Okay.
drive.
Mhm.
So I knocked out like Test of Courage and I finished Into the Dark and reading Out of the Shadows, right? So like those, I finished those three like on my vacation driving there and back again, but I haven't revisited any of these. I do want to though. I think it'll be good for me too, especially after reading Phase 2. I think it'd be nice to kind
Yeah.
of go back before Phase 3 and maybe revisit these.
It's sort of the reason I brought it up is I just find that you start to feel the dread a little bit more as you reread them, partially of course because you know what's coming, but
Right,
you start to
right.
look back at some of these characters and be like, oh no, don't do that, like, oh anything but that. Or you start to see a lot of these character flaws and characters that you would think otherwise would not have flaws, like even Stellan, who we perceive
Yeah,
as being this this perfect Jedi, this idealized version of what the Jedi are and who they were. You start to see some cracks in that, and
yeah,
it makes the events of the Fallen Star a lot more devastating when you're just like, he was a man like anybody else, just like Elzar is a man like anyone else. And seeing the slow unravel of Avar Kriss is really hard. um,
yeah.
but
Especially like
this,
I feel like with this book, we really get that point of view of Stellan being perfect because we're looking at it mostly through Elzar, right? Who
yeah.
I think does hold that opinion of like you said, he was the last one to kind of get promoted to the Jedi Master, so he's looking at them as like, like, why can't I be like that? Like, why are they so
Hmm.
perfect when I'm, why can't I be that? Especially then once he has like the guilt of, sleeping with the planner type thing. It's like,
Hmm.
really, like, am I living up to what I should be as a Jedi Master? Is a lot on his mind there. So much so that at the beginning of the next book,
Yeah,
he has to like remove himself almost entirely from that situation.
definitely. And I think also seeing himself, seeing himself for who he is and what he is. And I think that's another big reason why I've just really loved Elzar, is that he's pretty unapologetically himself. Like, he just sort of does what he's gonna do, and sort of like, to hell with everybody else, in the nicest way possible, I guess. um but seeing that there are consequences to doing that, right? Like, you can be unapologetically proud of yourself, but there are definitely going to be consequences that will, affect you. And I think that this book, we see some of those consequences kind of coming to light. I also love that this book gives him the reality check of Ty Yorick, who is a character we haven't really talked about, and how she kind of folds
Yeah.
into all of this yet. Ty Yorick is a former Jedi who leaves the Order for reasons we won't spoil. They're all there in the comics. Leaves the Order, and ends up sort of becoming this like freelance sort of monster hunter. Like, all of these
Hmm.
planets in the Republic are having these issues with the Drengir and with all these other monsters that are kind of plaguing their worlds. And she's basically a lightsaber. She's a saber for hire, and she doesn't follow the code. She follows all of her own sort of rules, but she ends up finding herself on Valo during the attack on the Republic Fair, and ends up finding herself sort of allied with Elzar in a lot of this, and kind of calls Elzar out for his bullshit,
Yes.
to put it nicely. Kind of calls him out, and I think it gives Elzar almost like a fresh perspective on, like, okay, maybe I don't have to be this perfect Jedi necessarily, because here's a character like Ty Yorick who does have these force abilities, does have a lightsaber, was on the Jedi Order, and she's doing just fine doing it her own way. So I love that dynamic between the two of them. I love it.
Yeah, like
I love it.
anytime those chapters would come up, it was very like the highlight of this book, seeing those two interact, um and just seeing also the main, like we kind of said, Elzar is like the main character of this book, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my boy Bell, who is like
Yeah, Belle also goes through it
so
like in this book.
so into this book. Yeah, he's got so much stuff going on in this book. So
So much.
So where we left Bell off at the end of Light of the Jedi, he thinks his master Loden is dead, which really puts him through it because he kind of like moves on for, like not moves on, but like has to think like, okay, he's dead, and he gets a whole new master, Indira, and all that kind of stuff.
Indira.
But then he kind of has these thoughts later of like, no, I feel like he's still alive. Like I don't think he's dead. And then at the end of this book, he unfortunately does lose
Yeah.
Loden for real. And then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
like this guy is going through it. I'm just very glad Ember was always safe and okay. And yeah, Bell is somebody that just for some reason really stuck with me. I liked his relationship with Loden in Light of
Yeah.
the Jedi. And then I kind of relate it to him just in the sense of having that hope out there of like, oh no, I didn't actually see him die. I am going to think he's out there. And I didn't know which way the book was going to go. And as I'm like listening to this part, where it's like, oh yeah, he's so close to saving him. Like they are so close to Loden is so close to
Yep.
getting out of there alive and well, and then it just it's like a tease. It's a tease of like, oh, they're gonna reconnect. They're gonna be master and apprentice again, and then it's just ripped out from under you.
It that scene was really hard for a lot of reasons because I think it's another perfect example in the High Republic of tearing down the Jedi to suddenly they're not so powerful and mighty, right? Because when
Right,
we
right.
see Loden Greatstorm in Light of the Jedi, he is this instantly lovable character. He's this instantly powerful and masterful and beloved Jedi, right? Everybody in the Order thinks highly of him, and everybody loves him, and
He's got a great name, Loden
he's got a
Greatstorm.
great
Like,
name.
that's awesome.
But that family dynamic that we have out on Elfrona in Light of the Jedi, it's you just can't help but love Loden Greatstorm. So seeing that flicker with Belle of like, oh, he might actually be alive, like I'm not giving up on him, like it breaks your heart because you just want that family to come back together. And for a brief moment, they are back together. And I think this is such a flex for the Nihil because, like, listen, did they need to kill this Jedi? No. I mean, there are so many other
Yeah,
Jedi that they literally could have killed that would have made the statement. Like, literally, Stellan was right there. But I think it's kind of a gut punch where it's like that family's not coming back together, and they're never going to be the same ever again. And having it happen uh, in front of Belle, like, listen, all of these characters need a friggin' hug and a therapist.
yeah,
Like, they all need a hug and a therapist in this book. Um, it's a pretty gut wrenching finale to that book, and it's the first time that we really, really, really catch a glimpse of how frightening this leveler, force eating
yeah.
character is that Marchion Ro is literally holding the leash to. Um, oof, I hate even thinking about it. Like, what a terrible way to go. It's just terrible.
Yeah, really. I mean, and like he was being like what tortured, experimented on. It's the whole
Yeah.
reason Ro is out there trying to get more Jedi later is to continue the experiments because he did break free. We
Hmm.
got points of view of Loden like breaking free and he's being weak and yeah, he's like losing. I mean, because this takes place what like a year after Light of the Jedi, close to it. So around a year after, that's a long time to be experimented on and
Hmm.
tortured and stuff like that.
And
So
it's it's like just I mean, not that any torture is,
like easy, yeah.
right, right, but it's like the most well, I guess you can't even call it dehumanizing because he's a Twi'lek, but like they literally cut off the man's Liku, like they cut off his head
Yes.
tails, and it's the most horrific torture that you could bestow upon such a beloved Jedi master, and you just want him so badly to be okay, and it just doesn't happen. So, tying it back to how we started this conversation about the Nihil and um the types of villains that they are, I think this is such a prime example of just how ruthless they are. And torture is fun for them, and torture is it's just a way of life when you're a Nihil, and it's pretty upsetting. um it, as we progress in the High Republic, we start to see a lot more of that experimentation and a lot more of these
Yeah.
torture scenes. And, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. There's definitely some stuff in the comics that I was like, ooh, oof, don't like that. Like, wish I hadn't seen that. But I think, for a long time, one of the things that Star Wars didn't had, we had this really terrifying villain in Darth Vader, right? And I know everybody talks about the end of Rogue One, where Vader's at the end of the hallway and
Yeah.
is so intimidating when that lightsaber lights up. But I know for me, I felt like we didn't have a lot of really incredible villains recently that really
Mhm.
gave me like the full body chills, um, until I started reading these books. Like, there they are, found them.
Yeah, I think that's why I like Rose so much too, right? Is
Hmm.
it is a very different villain, um, and a villain that kind of put a whole different spin on what a villain can be in Star Wars. Because before it was always just they got the red blade, they're the villain, right? So
Mm.
this is just a very different, little twist that they're able to do here. And the fact is, he actually takes like Loden's
I was gonna,
lightsaber,
I was gonna say,
so
speaking
he's
of
got a
blades,
different,
right?
yeah,
he he walks around with his gold blade, and
yeah.
it's pretty upsetting because I think we're all hard programmed to think about like red lightsabers and red blades being the bad guys, right? And here you have a villain who's literally wandering around just wielding this gold blade, and you're just like, oh, 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 not this,
Also
not this.
badass. It's badass too.
I mean, it is, I guess. It's just
That
it's
cover of the Phase
it is a
3
cool
book
cover.
is a
Yeah.
really cool cover.
Yeah, the Eye of Darkness is it's pretty cool cover. And seeing learning more about uh Martian Rose people in phase two, gives you a lot of perspective on the symbolism of the lightsabers being stolen, and just the types of traditions that his people kind of grew up with. So, super, super complex character. Like, there's a lot going on. He is not just the token generic bad guy, but you do start to learn a lot more about what makes Martian Rowe tick. I mean, even the beginning of this book, right? Like, he sets out to a traditional home world for his people, who didn't
Mhm.
technically have home worlds, but he sets out for this traditional land. He meets up with somebody who is allegedly in his own family, uses
Yes.
that woman, this old woman, uses her skills to get down into this very, very hard to get into cavern to get this frozen leveler out of the ground, and then kills the person he traveled with and then kills her. So it's just that level of ruthlessness is, man, he really hates the Jedi. He really hates the Jedi.
Yeah, and that's I think that chapter alone, which is like the first chapter we focus on with,
Mm.
Markion is coming down there, and just that
Hmm.
whole opening was what really sold me on him too. Like Light of the Jedi, we didn't get as much of like that's when he makes his power play, right? Is Eye of the Jedi to kind of become uh the leader of the Nihil. Before he's just the Eye,
Right.
and the three, Tempest runners are the
Hmm.
ones that are actually running it. That book is when he kind of puts in that uh power play, and then seeing him, like you said, to somebody that is supposedly in his own family, and then just that the person he traveled with just completely dead at the beginning there, and that's when it really sold me on, like, okay, this guy's like doesn't care, like he's gonna do
Hmm.
whatever he can to get to his end point, whatever that point is.
He, I feel like he almost has. This is the book where he kind of has something to prove, right? Because
Hmm.
the Tempest Runners, up until this point, are in a lot of ways they're kind of like bumbling. Like, they can't seem to just get it right. Like, they all like
Yeah.
Pan Ida in this book literally. Uh, he literally gets shot down by his own people essentially because he just can't. He's only in it for himself and he won't listen to orders, and it ends up biting him in the ass, biting him in the butt. Sorry, I'm not not my show, so I probably should be swearing. But
It's all right.
uh, this is the one where I feel like Martian Rowe really has to say, "Listen, like, we're doing it my way. I am in charge here. I don't care what any of you guys say. Like, I am in charge here." And that leveler is kind of his crown, It's like, you can't cross me because I have this horrific monster that is eating Jedi for breakfast. Like, can't cross me.
Right, right.
Um, yeah, there are definitely parts of his chapter and parts of his arc in here that are tough to read.
So I don't want to go too long here, but anything else about the book, or like what we should talk about to kind of like head towards the finish line here of this
My
story before
gosh.
we wrap it up?
I feel like I just feel like we haven't even talked about so much of it, but it is a very
I
dense
know
book. Like
it is.
there's a lot going on, and honestly, I feel like I would not be doing a service to the story by sort of hacking my way through it because I could talk about it all night, which obviously we're not here to do. Um, it's one of those books that I would tell you, if you can, when you're reading it, I strongly suggest trying to read the books, not necessarily just the adult books, just the comic books, just the mid-grade books, but see if you can read it sandwiched between the other books that are happening in the timeline, especially towards the end with that battle happening on Valo. You start to hear the checkpoints in from some of the other Jedi and some of the things that the other Jedi are going through, and they
Yeah.
get called into Valo to help out with. I mean, Vernestra is the one that comes straight to mind. So I know as we're marching towards the Acolyte and getting ready for the Acolyte, Vernestra is doing a million different things and finds herself out on Valo. So um, just sort of seeing what everybody is doing, just like at the end of Light of the Jedi with the battle on Hetzal. Seeing everybody kind of come together from their respective points around the galaxy to help out with Valo is really something as well. It's a tough read. I mean, it's an incredible read, but it definitely will break your heart in a lot of places. And as I've said before, it is a masterfully done audiobook. So if you are an audiobook
Yeah.
person, which I was not before the High Republic, Mark Thompson does not get enough appreciation for just how talented he is. There must be 1,000 voices that live in that man's head.
I
He nails
know. I
every
mean,
one of them.
he does so good. It's that's what I had at this point had Audible,
Mhm.
and I had been like I'd finished Light of the Jedi. I hadn't started reading Rising Storm yet, and I was like, I just finished another audiobook for like Fire and Blood for House of the Dragon, and I was
Mhm.
like, oh, I have like another credit. Like, what can I use it on? And I had heard like Dark Disciple. I had read Dark Disciple on the Audible,
Mhm.
you know, back then, and he did the voices then too. But I was like, oh yeah, let's just give this a shot. Like I listen to this a lot when I'm like walking, um, just like outside. I do my daily walk and we'll throw on an audiobook, and it helps during times where I'm really busy and don't have time to like sit down and like physically read a book. And he's part of the reason why I think I fell in love with this is just hearing like
Mhm.
I hear his voices when I read the books, and
Yeah.
like he just nails the characters. The audiobooks are just really well produced anyway because they put the Star Wars music in there, which elicits emotions
Yep.
at certain times. Like you'll hear the Force theme or Across the Stars, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
like this is hitting at
Yeah, it
at
really
the right
does.
time.
It hits.
And like sound effects of like lightsaber blades
Yeah.
or doors opening. It's just like a really well produced thing that I'm like, man, this is amazing. And it makes me look forward to my walk, which is good for my health and it's good
Yeah.
for,
What
just
I
good
don't recommend
overall.
is listening to them while you drive because there are some really high stress scenes where you
Yeah.
find yourself like going a little too fast because you're really stressed out. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. And really, the High Republic audio dramas are also really wonderful as well.
Yes.
I have I've listened to both that are produced so far. So it's Tempest Runner in Phase One and the Battle of Jeddah in Phase Two,
Hmm, hmm.
and both are incredible because they're produced with full casts. So it's nice to
Yes.
have like different performers doing each voice and hearing that fresh perspective. But yeah, the audio books and audio dramas bring such a new level to the High Republic, and yeah, they're really good, really really good. I love them a lot.
Yeah, it makes them feel like fully fleshed out like characters. You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah,
like
it's
the book does too, but I mean like you're hearing a different voice for each one. So it's like
yes,
you're like listening to real people. You're like, oh, that's Stellan, that's Elzar, that's
yeah.
you hear it. Yeah.
The line that lives rent free in my brain from this book is it's a scene between Ty, Yorick, and Elzar where they're doing essentially like a mind, they're like linking minds to try to get some
Hmm.
information around this rescue they're trying to pull off. And Ty reaches into Elzar's mind, and she goes a little too far back and sees some things she probably shouldn't have seen between Elzar and Avar when they were kids,
Yes.
doing
Yep.
things they shouldn't have been doing in the Jedi Temple. And Ty's line is, "Elzar, man, you dirty dog." And it just, that line, I don't know what it is, just lives rent free in my brain because of the way that Mark Thompson delivers it. It's so funny.
Yes.
But he has just really great voices for Indira and really great voices for Loden, and hearing that Twi'lek accent, it's just, yeah, there's
Yes. Yeah.
a lot of good stuff happening there.
It is. I know some people don't like his Markion voice, but I do. I
Oh,
think
I
it
love
makes him
it.
more sinister.
I
So
love it. And what I'm curious to know, and maybe one of your listeners will chime in on this, is I've not listened. Have you listened to his Thrawn books? Because he's also the narrator for the Thrawn books.
I haven't. I have Heir to the Empire, and I'm probably
Okay,
my plan was originally to listen to that once I got done like phase 1, but then I went into
got it.
phase 2, and I was like, I'll just keep rolling with this. So, um, is it supposed to be similar?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Is I would love to
Oh, okay.
know, because I feel like each of them has a very pronounced like accent, I guess we're gonna
Yes.
call it, right? Like way of speaking, manner of speaking. And I would love to know if there's any similarities between like the vocal tics between like Thrawn and
Mm.
Marchion Ro, because I feel like the way that they speak would be kind of similar. I don't know. I'm gonna have
I
to
could
listen to
see
the
that.
Thrawn books
I could
now.
see that. They're very similar in that. Like I could see where you'd think that. Like
Yeah.
same sort of delivery at times,
Right,
maybe.
right.
Um,
Yeah, so now I gotta listen to that.
yeah, I highly recommend it. If people are listening to this, like I said at in one of like the Acolyte trailer episode that we did, I said, hey, you guys can listen to these even if you haven't read them. Like if you don't mind spoilers, like just you know do it. But I do recommend reading the book or at least the listening to the audio book. And if you don't want to spend money on Audible and stuff, I definitely recommend going to your local library and signing up. And then your library might have through a program called Libby or
Hmm.
through Hoopla, where they have the audio books for these. And you just download it and listen to it. And it plays very well on those programs. So I highly recommend it if you don't want to spend, some audiobooks are very expensive. And then like Audible has the deal of like, $15 a month, you get a credit.
Right.
And, you know, originally I just kept stocking up through that. I would just have Audible and get my monthly credit and be like, what Star Wars book am I getting this month? And so I have a whole library of like phase 2 I still have like ready to go from Audible, but the library comes in handy too. Like that's how I
Yeah.
listened to them on the way down to my trip. Was I don't have Audible anymore, so let me see if they have Into the Dark. Oh, they did. Great. Now I can just listen to that and be good to go. So
Apple will periodically put them on sale too. That's how I kind of grab
true.
them, is if I
Yep.
see that they're ever like going on any sort of markdown or whatever, I'll grab a couple at a time. But um, I haven't listened to the mid grade or the young adult books.
Right
Those are
now
not
I'm listening.
generally.
Right now I'm listening to Race to Crash Point Tower. I'm not a big fan on the reader on that.
As I say, those aren't done by Mark Thompson. So
No,
I'm so used to him that now I'm like, how am I ever going to recover?
the YA one that I forget who did it for Into the Dark, but he like matched Mark Thompson's Markion. Like I was
Wow.
wondering how it would get. Like it wasn't one for one, but it was like he tried. It seemed like he tried to do
Mm,
Mark Thompson's Markion. While like some characters are being read differently by different people.
hmm.
Like but like their Orla was not the same at all. Right? But like the Markion was, and I was like, good, because that's how I hear Markion right now. So I'm like, it
Yeah.
better I was kind of wondering how that would sound, and it sounded good. It sounded good though.
And, and Orla's another one that Mark Thompson does a brilliant job with in
Yes.
uh, Fallen
Fallen
Star.
Star. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like, that'll be a hard shift for me because I'm so used to Mark Thompson, his Orla and his.
Their Leox are very similar though, because of course they're just doing like
It's Matthew
Matthew
McConaughey.
McConaughey.
It's so funny because when you look at the
Artwork.
concept artwork,
Yeah.
you're like, there he is. There's Matthew McConaughey in Star Wars.
Which makes me think, like, if they ever do live action Leox, are they gonna call Matthew up? They're gonna be like, "We gotta
I
get you in here."
they have to. They have, and Leox is such a great character that he'd be a fool to turn it down.
Yes.
Such a great character. Sitting there chewing on his toothpick, letting Geode, fix the ship. Oh, such great characters. I love them.
Yeah. I was so happy. Like, so the way that I had done it is I'd started reading Into the Dark, like, on the book. Um, and it lost me for a bit. Like, I just
Yeah.
got caught up doing other stuff. And then it was like before my trip, I was like, I need to go back and finish Into the Dark. So, but it had been like a year since I had started reading it, and I was like
Hmm.
30% in the book. So I was like, let me listen to the audio book to get me back up to the 30%. And then I just kept listening to it as I was,
Yeah.
driving down and stuff. But I was like, so I had met Leox and Geode and all those characters beforehand, and then I had originally transitioned into reading Rising Storm and
Mm.
Fallen Star. So when they appeared in Fallen Star, I already knew them, but
Yeah.
it was great to see them like back in there.
Yeah.
Without knowing their full journey in that book, because I had not finished Into the Dark at the time. I was like, oh, I know these guys. Like, this is great.
Yeah, it's their little arc, and we obviously shouldn't get into it because I'm sure you have somebody to talk about the Fallen Star, but like their little arc in the Fallen Star, absolutely just. I think I read that book, and I think I just remember crying for just hours and hours and hours over that book. I don't think I did anything but cry reading that book. It's and my all-time favorite Star Wars mantra is from that book. I literally wear it on my wrist every day. It's the Orla Jareni's "the trust yourself stupid" line, the
Oh,
very beginning of
nice.
the
Yeah.
book with Elzar. I think about that all the time. But yeah, it's seeing all that stuff come together in a neat little bow is really something.
It is. Yeah, the payoff was great in that. And
The
at the same
payoff was
time, like,
great.
what I was doing when I was listening to Fallen Star is when I would get to a certain point in the comics, I would read like the next part
Hmm.
of it. You know how, like, because that
Hmm.
whole storyline's coming together at the same time. So I'd be like, oh, I got to this point in the comic. I can't
Hmm.
continue reading this comic right now. I'm gonna have to finish Fallen Star before I go back and like, I was mixing and mingling with what I was doing, and it was a great payoff when you're reading it both
The
at the
first
same
time
time.
the first time I read it, I read the book all the way through and then went back to the comics. And let me
Mm.
tell you, there was nothing more gutting than just having to relive some of the things that happened on Starlight
Yes.
Beacon over
Yeah.
and over and over again. I'm like, why did I do this to myself? And then, you start to see what happens on Starlight Beacon in again through other characters' eyes. Like the book that I actually struggled with the most, that after the second reread I had a much deeper appreciation for, was the end of Phase 1 with Midnight Horizon. I don't know what
Okay.
it was about Midnight
Interesting.
Horizon, but I really struggled with Midnight Horizon. And I'm so used to reading about Corellia in other, I mean, especially in the in the expanded universe. My God,
Yes. Yeah.
everything happened on Corellia. Um, I don't know why I struggled with it so much, but I had a really hard time with that book. The second reading is where I really had a much, much, much deeper appreciation for it. And now, in Phase 3, reading the High Republic Adventures comics, I went back and picked up a couple chapters in Midnight Horizon, and man, they slap. They hit really, really hard.
Nice.
Um, so that I think is the beauty and the legacy of the High Republic, right?
Yeah.
Is that we are seeing, it's one great big story, but you can follow the story from different eyes, with different characters, and you can find your little, corner of the High Republic, I guess, and really fall in love with it. Or you can have commitment issues like me and fall in love with every one of those characters and just absolutely be devastated with every book.
Right.
The choice is yours.
Yes. The choice is yours if you are listening at home. We recommend it, is what we're getting across
We
here. We
recommend it
definitely
a little
recommend,
bit.
if you haven't read or listened to any of these High Republic books, get on it. Brand new era. Jump in. It's a lot of fun. There's reading orders on StarWars.com. There's reading orders on like Reddit and stuff. So just pick something that's easy for you and jump in. Um,
Definitely.
all right. So yeah, Jamie, thanks for coming on here. If you want to share
Thank
again
you.
what your where people can find you.
Yeah, so I am a host over on the Virtual Cantina network. You can find us just quick Google search or search on YouTube. I am a host on Daughters of the Galaxy, which is a female-driven show. We talk about the ladies of Star Wars, women in Star Wars, different experiences we've had in Star Wars, and I occasionally will dip in and sort of partner on some of our other shows. We have a great lineup. I do host every other Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern with my co-host Ashley Brienzo, and you can find me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is spelled a little bit interesting. It's the Jedi Archives, but it's JAIDI, like Jamie, but Jedi. I thought it was being funny. Now it's just a big headache. But like I said, I live so close to Batu. I post all the time from Batu. I do live streams from
That's
Batu. I
awesome.
do all sorts of fun stuff. So if you want to hang out with me there, I'd love to talk. And of course, if you are just starting out on your High Republic journey, I am over the moon delighted to help you get started and to share some reading orders and some tips and tricks for getting around the universe. So I love it. This was so fun, though. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have to have you on for like phase 2 or phase 3.
Oh,
Get you back
anytime. I could
on.
talk about this all day.
And people can follow this podcast at Podawakens on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, all that good stuff, or email us podawakens@gmail.com. Yeah, send us your feedback, all that good stuff, comment or like and subscribe to us here on the YouTube channel. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Thank you all for watching and listening along. We will catch you next time.